I'm not Ahmad Natour, if you may have noticed. My name is Alain Dikoff. I'm from the Institute for Political Science in Paris, and Yitzhak asked me to chair this session on the spot, so that's what I'm doing. I mean, my responsibility is quite limited. I would just make sure that you don't overstep your time and to introduce the discussion. Okay, so the session, the title is The Spaces of Civic Resistance, and we will have, as this morning, 3 presentations and then the general discussion. We start with the presentation of Yitzhak Reiter from Ashkelon College and the Truman Institute on minority representation in the public space, Israel in a comparative perspective. Yitzhak. Yes, you, okay.
No, never mind.
I didn't got the... I didn't...
my partner is here, so I don't need further presentation. It's okay.
Okay, it's okay. Maybe what is this?
It's too long. No. Forget about it. If it is at the expense of my time.
No. I would just say some words.
Keep it. Okay.
I would just say some words. Nevertheless, thanks. Yitzhak Reiter, expert in Middle East studies and Islam, and chairs the departments of Land of Israel Studies at Ashkelon College, and is a fellow of the Truman Research Institute and the Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies. But just the last sentence, maybe. He's the author of 10 books, numerous scientific articles, as well as editor or co-editor of 5 books.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alain, both for your generosity and agreeing to chair a panel in such a short notice. And let me also take this opportunity to thank my colleague and friend, Professor Richard Hecht, whose idea to form this conference was his before he just arrived to Jerusalem. And I'm grateful for him for the collaboration. And we are looking forward, the 2 of us and the rest of the speakers here, to produce a fascinating volume in the future. I will take you in a little different to a little different space, which is the space of political rights, the right of representation, the right of the minority to be represented. And I will try not to look at one particular case study, but to actually compare between Israel and Europe and other places in the world as much as the time will allow me. If I speak about minority representation in the public sphere, there are different forms of minority representation. What you see on this slide is actually the memorial of the massacre of the 1956 massacre of Kfar Qasem in the Israel Center Arab village at what we call the Hameshulash, or the triangle. And this is only one way of memorials to be represented in the public sphere. This is a square in the village. But as we heard before, we can speak about geographical names, street names, memorials, museums, holy sites, localities like villages and towns who disappeared, the use of language, of communication, and state symbols and education, and so on and so forth. Now, what is proper representation? How can we balance between the need of the majority in a place to manifest its dominance, a dominant culture, versus the need of the minority to be represented in the public sphere? I classified my comparative cases into 2 major criteria. One is that indigenous versus migration minorities. Indigenous in Israel, Arabs are indigenous people. In Europe, or in Australia, or Indians in America are also indigenous minority, versus Muslims in Europe who are an immigration society. The second parameter here is whether the majority-minority relationship is tensed. Is it tensed with a broad conflict as we have here in Israel / or - Palestine? Or is it something that is like more normal negotiation between minorities and majorities as you have in other places? The challenge is really the challenge of our time, I think, is the question to how to tolerate the minority need of being represented in the public sphere. And I will speak about active representation, not only just representation of like you have a symbol of a memorial in the middle of a city, but active representation means, as an example, to have an active cemetery or an active mosque in the middle of a predominant Jewish or non-Muslim town, for if I speak about the Muslim minorities. Yes, the slide that I showed before, you see the flag. If I take one example, Upper Nazareth, Nazrat Elite, recently situated 4 flags in the main entrances of the city, huge Israel flags, because Upper Nazareth is being now challenged by a Muslim minority who became around 1/5 or perhaps more of the population of Nazareth. And there is a debate, what is Nazareth? Is it a Jewish town or is it a mixed Jewish-Arab town? And they are, of course, the reason why they put these flags as symbols at the entrance is their fear to lose the identity of the city and to transform from a Jewish predominant city into something else. Now, the universal trend regarding minority representation varies. You see here a beautiful Aboriginal art from Australia. And in Australia, they have the Aboriginal Pact, to make it short, that I would say protects the sites of heritage of the Aboriginal majority. In the United States, we have the special law of Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act, known as NAGPRA. And I know that Professor Hecht was one of the members of board of one of these region, or I don't know if it was a federal board of representation of the Indians, the right to preserve their cemeteries and graves. And if you look at the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Minorities of 2007, you can find in, I think it was Article 13, manifestation and of the rights of the minorities, not exactly to religious places, but places of cultural heritage and historical sites that are being universally, or at least this declaration was not yet recognized by all countries. It is only a declaration, but this is the trend. The trend is to recognize the right of minorities to be represented. Now, if I speak about the reasons for representations, I can classify them between 2. The first is the utilitarian factor. According to the utilitarian factor, the past of the minority, to erase it, as Israel is doing in most of the parts of the country, or at least historically, erasing the past actually leads the minority to be alienated from the state and leads to the exclusion of the Arab minority from the public sphere, of the official public sphere. And there is also the moral factor. The moral factor is I would say the very core principle of democracy to be not only just a majoritarian democracy, but a democracy that, although the decisions are taken in a majority, still protects the rights of the minority. So this is the challenge of here. If we ask ourselves, how do we balance between the needs of both the majority and the minority? The issue is an issue of proportionality. I mean, the majority never agrees to lose the identity of their place, because the identity of the place is to express the predominant aspect of this place. But if you want to allow the minority to be represented, the question is, to what extent, if you allow minority to be represented, to what extent is it still a predominant city or predominant street or predominant site or compound? If I go, as an example, back to Australia, when I visited the National Museum at Canberra in Australia, I was astonished to find out that about 90% of the museum, of the National Museum, is about our Aboriginal art or Aboriginal history. And well, you know, the white men in Australia, they don't have much of history to be proud of, considering that there were criminals who were driven out to that island. I think that they are lucky today, but still they are proud with, if you go to Sydney as an example, you find neighborhoods with the names like Woolloomooloo, Bondi, and so on and so forth. Nobody knows what these names are, but they are of Aboriginal history, and the Australians are proud about it. This has nothing to do with the rights that they grant their Aboriginal minority, who comprises about 2% of the Australian society. Now, I will discuss the issues of Muslim cemeteries and mosques. I will speak about 4 case studies from each of these 2 types, comparing Europe to Israel. Now, if I look at the issue of cemeteries and how Europe treats cemeteries of the non-Christians, of the minorities, be they Jews or Muslims, there are some cases, particularly today there is the issue of protecting and preserving Jewish cemeteries, and there is a committee, Havad Lehagana, the committee to protect or to preserve Jewish cemeteries in Europe, that strives for this trend of preservation, and it is accepted. Sometimes we hear about damage or vandalism towards graves, or particularly in intense situations in the Middle East arena. And the other issue is permitting the immigrant Muslim minority to have their own cemetery. Recently, in Germany and elsewhere, we learn that the countries, the states and the officials, the local municipal authorities, they allow Muslims to have their special graveyards. Let me just note that 95%, according to a study 2 years ago, 95% of Muslims send the bodies back to their home country. Of immigrant Muslims send their bodies back to their home to be buried in their home country, but the remaining of them, they are allowed to have their Muslim graveyards. What happened in Israel in terms of Muslim cemeteries? Between 1948 and I would say the mid-1970s, most of the cemeteries of the Muslims were or bulldozed or turned into other utilities or other purposes, such as you have the Gan Ha'atzmaut in Tel Aviv, most of Gan Ha'atzmaut in Jerusalem. In Tel Aviv, it became the Hilton Hotel. In Jerusalem, the Mamila issue that I will refer to it later on. Then we have some cases that Muslims succeeded in their struggle to preserve their cemeteries. We have the one case in southern Tel Aviv, in Tasso, or Tel Giborim of today, in which the local Waqf head of trustees succeeded to preserve or to rescue part of this cemetery, because this land, which was almost vacant, almost with no remains of graves to be visible, he succeeded, at least half of it, to protect and to preserve, although it was sold to a business company for housing project. By, first of all, what he did, and I admit that at that time I was a civil servant working for the Prime Minister's office in charge of the Waqf affairs, and I was invited to the funeral of this Waqf activist, Abed Badawi Kaboub. He interred his wife after she passed away, interred his wife in this cemetery, and then they started to bury more and more people in order to protect and rescue and safeguard this cemetery. Another example is the Istiklal Cemetery in Haifa. In Haifa, again, it was, since Waqf assets belong to the state today, they were handed over to a government custodian, and he sold it to a project, to a public project of housing, with an agreement with the Waqf. But the Muslim public argue that the Waqf officials that the government nominated are collaborators with the government, so they do not trust them, and they struggle to against them. Although in both cases, both in Tasso and in Istiklal in Haifa, there is a court verdict to allow this transaction to take place and to build the construction against the Muslim community desire. Still, the Muslims succeeded in their struggle to protect and to preserve these two cemeteries, in spite of the fact that about 30 years passed since the transactions took over. Now, the third case study is the Museum of Tolerance that is now constructed in center of West Jerusalem on part of the former Mamilla cemetery. You can see here the new design of Chayutin architects. I published a book about this, and the book is available on the internet in the Hebrew version, and it will be, the English version is forthcoming. So in Mamilla, the case was that actually the plot, I'm trying to analyze why the Mamilla case, the Muslim community lost its case. There were 4 reasons. The first reason was that this particular plot was used for about 2 or 3 decades as a parking lot, municipal public parking lot, and the Muslim community forgot about this area. It was only the ambition, personal ambition of Sheikh Raed Salah, the head of the northern faction of the Islamic movement, who made an issue of this affair. You can see here Sheikh Raed Salah himself in person repairing one of the tombs of this cemetery. And this is the second reason, extreme actor. My analysis, if you read my book, is that had the proponents or the advocates for preserving this plot of the Mamilla cemetery be moderate Muslims, I doubt if the High Court would issue a verdict against the Muslim community in this case. The third factor is that the Muslims themselves, they neglect the cemetery for a long time. We see here organizing a day of cleaning the cemetery, but it was only 1 or 2 days that they spent. The Al-Fahim people spent at this cemetery, but they forgot about it for many years. And the fourth reason has to do with the Israeli government policy. The Israeli government policy is to ignore minority rights concerning holy places, particularly if they are in abandoned places or abandoned sites within a Jewish city. I will move from cemeteries to the, or let me just make interim conclusion regarding the cemeteries. I would say that what we see in recent years is a change in the trend. We see a change of trend. I think that today the government, as well as other public NGOs, are more aware of the problem. There is more sensitivity regarding Muslim holy places. And I think that we are in a beginning of a new era regarding these issues of representation. Thank you. So I have to move to the mosques. In Europe, there is a study by the way, by Stefano Olievi on the mosques of Europe that I used extensively. And what you can see, there is a debate whether, the debate in Europe is whether a new immigrant community has the right to move out from what they call basement mosques, of basement prayer halls, into a mosque. Do you hear me? Sorry. Into a mosque. Into a grand mosque, to build new grand mosque with minarets to be visible in the public sphere, to be visible. This is the main issue. And what we see, the debate in Europe, it takes place whether the community, the Muslim community, is, what is the size of the minority? It varies. If the minority is very small, and if they do not have citizenship rights to vote, the outcome will be different if they have some political power in the city politics. Also, if they are big enough, they're still, the majority is not so frightened from them. This was also the case of the referendum of Switzerland regarding the minarets, where in those cantons where Muslims were overrepresented or represented in large numbers, the vote was not against minarets as it was in cantons where Muslims do not exist or not in large numbers at least. Now I try to differ between parameters of success or failure to build a new mosque. What you see here in this slide is a mosque, a modern mosque. No one would recognize it as a mosque in Bavaria, in Pansberg, where the minaret only carries the verse from the Quran that calls for prayer. But you don't have a call for prayer, you don't have an azan. This is a way that the Muslim community compromised with the majority not to disturb the neighbors. And I found that in places that you have a Muslim community which is, I would say, moderate, peaceful, finding channels of dialogue with the majority, with the municipal authorities, with the neighbors around, there is more likelihood that they will succeed in building the new project. The reasons for failure, the conditions for failure is that in places where there are fears, which I see as disproportionate fears of the minority, that the minority will grow up and the minority will control the skyline, the minority will control the entire landscape of the city and the image of the city, you see less likelihood to allow the mosque to be built. And if you are looking to what happened in French, my friend Professor Dickhoff, Le Figaro recently published a poll according which only 18% of the French people say that they support the building of a new mosque in France, just to understand the difference between the municipal authorities who are responsible to allow freedom of worship, or perhaps also freedom of the minority to be represented, and the public, the general public. Same slide that Kobe used before, but in different angle. And one reason why the Hassan Bey Mosque, the struggle of the Arabs in Jaffa to protect and to rescue the Hassan Bey Mosque from being transformed into a business center, was that it doesn't disturb the landscape. You see the buildings around, it is not so controlling the skyline around, and there are some other reasons. I don't have enough time to speak about it, but I can refer to it later on. The other issue also presented by Kobe, Sidna Ali or Sayyiduna Ali, in Fusha Arabic, I would say that here again, the fact that it did not disturb the Jewish neighborhood around, because it is the edge of the city, as well as the fact that it is a significant landmark. It was preserved by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the same Israeli ministry. By the way, Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs was dominated by Orthodox Jews, the Mafdal or Hamizrahi, most of the time. And they were the ones who mostly protected within the Israeli government the right of the minority to keep its places of worship and cemeteries. In Tiberias, the attempt of the Islamic movement failed because there are no Muslims residing in Tiberias, and there was a harsh and aggressive reaction by, Tverianim, the Tiberian gangs who resisted the Muslim, and they reached a compromise that the mosque will be only renovated and kept sealed without a prayer there. In Beersheba, it's a different story. Here, there is a forthcoming paper by my colleague and ex-student Lior Lehers about the Mosque of Beersheba in a comparative perspective. We will speak in this paper about something new. I think it's a new concept of what we call transitional representation, based on transitional justice of the minorities, or transitional justice in post-war situation. We speak about a situation of transitional representation, that when we move from peace to from war or conflict, from high tensed conflict to more a peaceful situation, we can allow a gradual change in the representation of the minority, even in a predominant Jewish neighborhood. So in conclusion, I would say that what we see is that if you look at why minorities are reluctant to manifest their presentation in a predominant city of another culture, the basic motivation is fear. Fear, and again fear. I have a long list of fears that I can address afterwards. Then the question is, how do you combat these fears? We do it via channels of dialogue. The reason why in Europe cases of new mosques succeeded was that the municipality authorities themselves developed channels, committees, advisory boards between the Muslim community, the minorities, and the authorities, and between the different neighborhoods at that places or neighborhoods. In the case of Israel, I think that it is about time, 64 years after Israel's existence, that we will try to change the existing policy. I think that the government did not review its own policy since 1948, and it is about time to reconsider it and to construct a new policy that will be more attentive to the Arab Muslim minority, particularly to open channels with the moderate Muslims to allow more representation in the public sphere without the fear of changing the predominant landscape and symbols of the Jewish area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yitzhak, for this very comprehensive presentation. And now we'll go on with the second presentation by Hila Zaban, In the Name of Pluralism, Fighting the Perceived Ultra-Orthodox Penetration in the Neighborhood of Baka. Hila is a PhD student in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Gurion University. And her research is about the Baka neighborhood of Jerusalem and the ways in which it has been changing.
Thank you. Okay, so in recent years, the neighborhood of Baka in Jerusalem had experienced struggles triggered by the fear of ultra-Orthodox penetration into the neighborhood. Shortly before these struggles, Baka's residents produced their written vision for the neighborhood, a part of the public participation in the current planning process of Baka that the municipality initiated. The residents' vision stated that Baka's houses should be properly preserved and that the neighborhood should remain heterogeneous, communal, and pluralistic. The term pluralism had recently received a different meaning in Jerusalem and now basically means non-Haredi. Therefore, when Baka's residents say that they want the neighborhood to remain pluralistic, what they are really saying is that they want it to remain a non-Haredi neighborhood. Baka is a neighborhood undergoing processes of gentrification from the late 1960s. What started as a regular gentrification process had later become super gentrification by the super rich. And yet, Baka is still considered a heterogeneous neighborhood where all archaeological layers of its earlier residents are represented. Baka's residents are rich and poor, Sephardic and Ashkenazi, secular and religious, and even Haredi. Native Israelis, old-time Olim of the 1950s, and newer Olim from Western countries, mainly North America, France, and Britain. There are even some Greeks and Palestinians who remained intact, a memorial to the population who inhabited the neighborhood prior to 1948. While not all residents were properly represented in the thinking process of the neighborhood's vision, activists still use the vision's principles as widely agreed upon ones. They did so in order to frame these and other struggles as struggles which purpose it is to shape Baka's present and future character according to the stated will of its residents. Ever since I started my PhD fieldwork in Baka in 2008, there have been several local struggles there over various issues. The way I see it, they are usually motivated by the sentiment of threat, and this is relating to your conclusions. The ultra-Orthodox penetration is one such threat. Having the symbol of Kiryat HaYovel neighborhood in their minds, some of Baka's residents believe these trends should not be allowed to develop in Baka. What I wish to claim here is that Baka's activists use the principles of the neighborhood's vision, specifically the principle of pluralism, falsely or exaggeratedly for the purpose of gaining legitimation and recognition for the struggle. I shall also claim that things are more complicated than they are publicly framed, and that the fear of the ultra-Orthodox penetration into Baka is more a perceived threat than a real one, and that the actual core of these struggles is the will to shape the neighborhood's public space. I'm about to tell you the story of two different struggles which took place in Baka in 2009 and 2010. The struggle against the takeover of public lands in the neighborhood by a Haredi non-profit organization, and the struggle against the operation of a Chabad summer camp in Baka's community center. The high demand for real estate in Baka left very little open space in it. The few still vacant spaces, even if only temporarily, are desired by many. One such space is a public brown space in Gidon Street, number 14, intended for a public building. Until recently, there was a plan to build a mikveh there. But this plan seems to have been abandoned recently, and the fate of this space is yet to be known. This open space is located near other public buildings such as a school, the community centers, kindergartens, another open space that used to serve as a community garden, a playground, and an old but active mikveh, which is located at the top floor of the building, while the bottom floor of this building serves the non-profit organization Halevi Haaretz, translated the milk of the land. Halevi Haaretz is operated by a Sephardic Haredi man known in Baka as Rabbi Yair Ben David, who was never actually ordained as rabbi. His organization aids religious youth in risk and the needy, but also runs relatively cheap after-school care and summer camps, both designated for children from the nearby area who usually come from strong backgrounds. Ben David gained entrance into this public building through his contacts in the municipality some 20 years ago, and apparently still has very powerful people backing him up there. In 2009, he expanded his presence from the main building to its immediate surroundings by building a small, closed and fenced petting zoo. This petting zoo was, however, built on a private property intended to be built upon in the near future. Ben David invaded a territory in which the entrepreneurs of the building project were ordered to develop an extension to the playground that already exists nearby for the sake of the neighborhood residents. Ben David's invasion therefore risked this future development. Shortly after building the petting zoo, Ben David put his hands on 14 Gidon Street, right across the street from him. On one October day in 2009, a high and locked fence was erected on the Gidon plot of land. Residents then started to inquire who is behind this and what it was meant for. They eventually discovered that it was Ben David behind it. He wished to turn the empty plot into a community garden, which will be cultivated by his organization and by the School for Immigrants' students, which is the nearest neighbor. Ben David had the permission of a high-rank man in the municipality, the head of the municipal social department, who may have even built the fence for him. He had not gone through the formal municipal bureaucratic channels one has to go through for the purpose of land allocation. Ben David also received support from to his actions from his friend, a Sephardic old-time resident of Baka, and then a long-time member of the community council, but had not turned to the community council to gain its formal approval, as would have been expected. I should now clarify that in Jerusalem, there is a unique form of local governance, one political level underneath the municipality, called community councils, minalim keilatiyim. These councils are composed of elected representatives from the neighborhoods they serve, and as well as paid employees. Community councils also operate community centers, which is matnasim. This messy episode created a local drama. The residents were furious at the way in which public land was being taken from the public without notice and with disobedience to regulations. They accused the community council of turning a blind eye on the matter, while the council strongly held to the statement it knew nothing about it and that this one council member acted on his own behalf. Letters were sent to the general manager of the municipality, to the municipality controller, and to the mayor. Finally, a large meeting was set on site in which attended the head of the municipal social department, several other high-rank municipal employees, the heads of the community council, Ben David himself, and several residents. The atmosphere was heated, and people threw accusations at each other. The head of the social department ran the show. He had decided to continue the meeting in the community council offices away from the furious residents. The agreement that was made was to cut the high fence half its height and keep it unlocked, and also to divide the land between three bodies: Ben David's organization, the School for Immigrant Children, and the Community Council, allowing each of them to cultivate his own plot. In his planned visit to the area, the mayor of Jerusalem also approved of this agreement. The residents, however, were highly unsatisfied by these outcomes. For them, the events on 14 Gidon Street were an example of the way in which the city of Jerusalem is caving in under Haredi pressure. It was also a blunt example for the way things get done in this city, where rules and regulations do not matter much and might is right. On Israel's Independence Day on April 2010, residents who tried to enter the garden in 14 Gidon Street were welcomed by a locked fence, contrary to the agreement which specified it should remain unlocked. One resident wrote an angry email to all residents activists. He informed the others of the locked fence on Independence Day and added, "Pay attention to this insolence. A Haredi organization is trying to prevent neighborhood residents from using the community garden and celebrate Independence Day." End of quote. But what is this claim based upon? It is true that Ben David is a Sephardic Haredi man and appears as such, but people who know him say that he is an open-minded man and even served in the army. The claim that the fence was locked due to Ben David's anti-Zionism is therefore likely to be wrong. Another resident told me in an interview with him in May 2010, "I'm afraid of the Haredization of this neighborhood. Sometimes I see Haredis here and I drive them out. I tell them, get out of here. Halevi Haaretz is a Haredi base with a desire to extend. I can see its imperialism. 14 Gidon Street is an excellent example. I don't see the danger as immediate, but there is no doubt we should stand guard if we do not want Baka's character to change." End of quote. My own interpretation of the story of 14 Gidon Street is that this is a struggle over the public space, over the ways in which it should be used, by whom and for what purposes. By demanding to be part of the shaping of the neighborhood's public spaces, residents really get to determine the future of their neighborhood. Not allowing them to take part in it made them feel powerless and run over. When this is done improperly and involves Haredis, the outcome is an outburst. Ben David is certainly a man who knows how to get what he wants. He's clearly very persuasive and has high-ranked people in the municipality supporting him. He might indeed have imperialist aspirations for his organization, but does this mean a Haredization of the neighborhood in the Kiryat HaYovel style? Why did the activists bring the Haredi threat into the struggle, which was not a classic Haredi secular struggle? I claim that the fact that Ben David is a Haredi man makes no difference in this matter. It is the norms of his behavior that should alarm people and not his appearance and beliefs. His being Haredi was only used as a way to demonize him, to present him as an invading outsider who threatens our pluralistic neighborhood, in order to gain more support for the struggle against him and his actions. It seems that if the man is Haredi, it makes it all right to accuse him, to attack him and muddy his name. It makes it all right to accuse the municipality for its caving into Haredi pressure and interests. It makes it all right to use hollow stereotypes like the one that Haredis are non-Zionists and therefore prevent neighborhood residents to celebrate Independence Day. Everything seems to be allowed when a struggle is framed as a struggle against the Haredi population, the Haredi penetration. But is this what pluralistic people do? Does Halevi Haaretz really threaten the pluralist principle, meaning the ability to live a non-Haredi lifestyle with no religious coercion in the public space? I don't believe it does. I shall now speak about the other struggle against the operation of a Chabad summer camp in Baka's community center. This struggle began in June 2010 when residents saw pamphlets advertising a Chabad summer camp in Baka. According to the pamphlet, the summer camp was to take place at the community center building. It wasn't the first year that Chabad operated their summer camp in Baka's community center, but that year it was added up to the former event, with the sentiment of Haredization of Baka taking place and the critique against the community council. When residents asked the community council for explanations, the head of the council said that the council's attempt to organize its own summer camp failed, the money is needed, and Chabad is a paying customer. This incited another struggle out of the fear of ultra-Orthodox penetration. What Chabad does is to offer its services at lower prices than the regular market prices for similar services, as was also the case for this summer camp in Baka. Such offer may be attractive for many parents, even at the price, which for some is not really a price, of exposing their children to Chabad's missionary agenda. A similar episode occurred in a nearby neighborhood where residents' pressure managed to prevent such summer camp from taking place in their community center. Baka's residents, the most active of which on this matter were secular, tried to accomplish similar results. They started off with writing emails demanding the community council to cancel Chabad's summer camp in the building. One resident wrote, for example, "We have to stop this thing, as these righteous men will not suffice in a summer camp. See the case of the petting zoo in Gidon Street. For them, an occupied territory shall not be returned," end of quote. Others said that allowing Chabad to operate at the community center building is against the principles of pluralism and tolerance, and that the council should not sell out the neighborhood so cheaply. Another form of pressure on the community council was the recruitment of a member of the city council, Pepe Alalo from Meretz Party, to interfere in this matter. Alalo sent an email to the head of the community council asking him to keep Baka free and pluralistic neighborhood and not harm the existing status quo by allowing Chabad to take part in the community center's activities. The head of the municipal social department that I mentioned before ordered the community council to reach a formal decision in this matter. In order to do so, the council called a special meeting and invited a couple of active residents, as well as the summer camp organizer from Chabad. The discussion, I was told, was very temperamental. Some council members attacked the secular activists, telling them that they do not represent the neighborhood and that what Chabad offers is a fair opportunity for the less economically fortunate residents of the neighborhood. The neighborhood does not belong to these activists, they said, but to all its residents, some of which are poor and or Haredi. The organizer of the summer camp, on his part, clarified that he is organizing the camp privately and not through Chabad, but that the summer camp shall deliver Chabad's agenda, which he agreed to say was missionary. Finally, the decision was to hold the Chabad summer camp that summer, as time was pressing, but not allow it to take place in the community center building in following years. Although this struggle was much more a secular, pluralist versus Haredi struggle, I still wish to claim that this is not what this struggle is really about. Like the former struggle, this one too is really over the shaping of the neighborhood's public space. It was not about the existence of a Chabad summer camp in a pluralistic neighborhood per se, nor was it Chabad's larger activities in the neighborhood, but rather the fact that the summer camp was to take place in the community center. Activists thought that this is a public place which should reflect the way of life shared by most neighborhood residents. When in future years Chabad operated its summer camp from a nearby building, it irked some of the secular activists, but they did nothing about it. Another point which makes things more complicated is that the organizer of the summer camp, who also runs a Chabad center in Baka, is not exactly working for Chabad, although somewhat associated with them. Apparently, he does not enjoy their support and recognition. This struggle was framed as a struggle for the sake of pluralism, a framing inspired by the residents' vision for the neighborhood. But not all of Baka's residents interpret pluralism the same way. Some, like several council members, think that a pluralistic neighborhood is a diverse neighborhood. in which there is a room for everyone, for everybody, including Haredis. Do Chabad's activities in Baka mean the beginning of an ultra-Orthodox penetration into the neighborhood? I'm not convinced that it does, and I see the reaction towards it as somewhat exaggerated. As in the previous struggle, here too, it is residents' demand to take part in the shaping of their neighborhood through the shaping of its public space, which is the main point. I would like to conclude in saying that the ethnography from Baka shows that the shaping of the public space is a remarkably important issue for people, as the public space reflects the character of a place. In Baka, struggles over the shaping of the public space were framed as anti-Haredization struggles, although such framing was false and exaggerated. The purpose of such framing, according to the agreed-upon principle of pluralism, was to gain more legitimacy and support to the struggles. I claim that the ultra-Orthodox penetration into Baka is more a perceived threat than a real one, at least for the time being. I also claim that there is a whole politics around the usage, sometimes a cynical usage, of the fear of Haredization winning card. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, which took us from started with a micro sociological level, but which was able to show us much broader perspectives. We will end up with the third presentation by Masha Halevi, who is currently postdoctoral fellow here at the Truman Research Institute. And her research is focusing on Catholic holy places in the Holy Land. And the paper the title is The Alternative Plan of the Holy Sepulcher, 1949.
Thank you. Okay, so the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, obviously the holiest place for the Christendom, except some of the Protestant denominations, is a public space, is simultaneously shared and contested by 6 denominations, 6 various groups of the same religion. Okay, I'm sure I'm saying some things that you all know, but just for the sake of people who might not know it. The 3 major denominations are the Greek Orthodox, and then you have the Roman Catholics and the Armenians, and then 3 smaller communities, the Ethiopians, the Copts, and the Syrian. I'm going to talk about an alternative plan for the Holy Sepulchre, which was proposed in 1949. And if it would be implemented today, when you go to the Holy Sepulchre, you would visit this place. Okay, imagine that. So in order to understand how this plan came about and what it means, okay, I would like us to go very briefly through some kind of an introduction to the history of the Holy Sepulchre, including the previous Byzantine and Crusader plans. Okay, so this is the Byzantine Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built in the 4th century. I apologize, it's in Hebrew, but the main entrance was from the east, from the Cardo. Okay, then you would enter an open space, a court called atrium. From the atrium, you would proceed to the basilica, which was very big. It had 2 aisles from each side of the nave, and the apse of the basilica was facing west, and not as we used to. Usually the apse is facing the east, because of the burial place of Jesus here. Then you would go to an open court, which was called the Holy Garden, in which you had the rock of Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion and death of Jesus. And then you would enter another church, a concentric church, which was called a rotunda, with probably a round dome, which contained the tomb of Jesus, and above the tomb an edicule, okay, a small building. You can see it here. This is the Cardo, and this is the open court, and this is the big basilica, Constantine, and the apse falling and turning to another open space, the Holy Garden, the Golgotha, and then the rotunda. This church was destroyed in 1009 by Al-Hakim, was rebuilt on a much, much smaller scale by Byzantine Emperor Constantine Monomachos, And then when the Crusader came here, they were not familiar with this huge Constantinian church, and they built something completely different. So they changed the main entrance. The entrance from the Crusader period and until this day is from the south. Okay? They rebuilt and they covered the Holy Garden, which now turned into a basilica. This basilica is facing, as it should, right, the east and not the west. And they rebuilt the edicule and the dome of the rotunda in a cone-like shape. Okay, I don't have an image of it. After the Crusaders, okay, you can see here the two plans. The Crusader Basilica was much, much smaller, as you can see. Okay, and those places here, the Crypt of St. Helena and the Crypt of the Discovery of the True Cross, they underground. Okay, so basically what's above the ground is about half of the Constantinian Basilica. You can see all those changes, the open spaces here, and the open space here where it's covered here, and so on and so forth. After the Crusaders were expelled from Jerusalem, and especially starting with the Ottoman period, the person who was responsible, who actually owned the Holy Sepulchre, was the Sultan. And the Sultan, after following the political pressure of various nations and following a bribe of the communities, issued the official documents which are called firmans. Okay? And every time was the issue, a lot of times simultaneously, contradicting firmans, giving the same areas of the church to different communities. So obviously we're talking about a very sacred but also very contested space where different communities have documents which show that the same place is in their possession. Here you can see the various colors of different communities. The yellow is a place which belongs to everybody. Blue is Greek Orthodox. Brown is Catholic. Red Copts. Green Armenians, so on and so forth. This situation was allegedly solved or fixed or permanently fixed in 1852 with the famous firman of the status quo. Okay? And the status quo determined not only the ownership of the sites inside the church, the way of public worship, decorations of altars, of shrines, use of lamps, tapestry pictures, and even the nature of the officiants. And yet, the tension between the denomination, as well as issues of ownership and uses of a church, really not solved until this very day. I think the symbol, which you probably all know, of the status quo is what is called the ladder of the status quo. And this ladder belongs to the Armenians. And it's mainly important because it's there. Okay? And it's there because it was there before the status quo. Now, nobody uses it today anymore. This is the image of the same ladder here from 1854. Okay? And there's always an attempt of Catholics and the Orthodox who asking, the representative of the status quo, who asking the Armenian representative to take off the ladder, because the first thing that every tour guide does when it comes to the Holy Sepulchre is, instead of talking about how holy this place is, about the core of Christian theology, the place of the crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, they're talking about the ladder. Okay? And how nobody can remove this ladder, and how ridiculous Christian communities are, and so on and so forth. And they didn't manage. It's still there. And it's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So the major opportunity to finally resolve this issue of ownership and contested liturgies and so on and so forth presented in 1927. In 1927, there was a very big, major earthquake in Jerusalem, which severely damaged the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The British, it was a British mandate, examined the church. They said the church is in immediate danger of collapse. And this is how the church looked like from inside and outside, okay, all in supports. By the way, some places, especially the edicule of the Holy Sepulchre, till these days are in support. And the thing is that when something minor happens, the community who owns the place can fix it. But when something major happens, then the three major communities, the Latins, the Orthodox, and the Armenians, are the only one who can decide, okay, how to change it, and they have to decide it together. If not, the only person who can, the only organization who can decide what is going to be changed is government. So it's took a long, long time for those three communities to reach an agreement. And in the meantime, the Catholic representation of the Holy See, representatives of the Holy See in the Holy Land, decided this is a great opportunity to cut this Gordian knot, okay, of joint ownership. And they proposed what I think is really fantastic proposal. They proposed to destroy the Holy Sepulcher, okay, and to keep only the underground chapel of St. Helena and the chapel of the Invention of the Cross, and instead to build new 7 churches, each one for each of the communities. They presented this plan in 1949 in a book which called Il Santo Sepolcro di Gerusalemme, Splendore, Miserie, Speranze. Okay, it's even, you can translate it to English without my help, I think. This book had 3 major parts. The first one was historical, telling the history of the Holy Sepulchre. The second described its present wretched condition. And the third one was the future plan of the church. It was made by 2 architects who were appointed, listen carefully, by the apostolic delegate of the Vatican to Egypt and Palestine. Okay, so practically saying by the Vatican. His name was Gustavo Testa, and the names of the architects were Luigi Marangoni. Luigi Marangoni was responsible for the Church of San Mark in Venice, and Antonio Berluzzi, who already built many important churches for the Franciscans in the Holy Land, such as Gethsemane, Mount Tabor, and so on and so forth. So in the preface to his book, Archbishop Testa, the apostolic delegate, described the poor condition of the church, the labyrinth of various chapels, putting forward the idea of erecting a new, magnificent church that would enable the peaceful coexistence of various rites and rituals of the different denominations. And I quote, "I thought about it as a sweet dream, and then I said to myself that often the craziest ideas turned into a glorious reality. Is it not possible that out of the respect we all share for the tomb of the Lord, we will be able to reach an agreement? Thank God, the years of the difficult Ottoman rule, which aggravated tensions between the communities, are over. Now, in the atmosphere of peace and mutual understanding, it doesn't seem impossible to cooperate in the name of God." Oh well, let's look. Testa's intention was to build, as I said, nearly ex nihilo, right? 3 major churches, 1 for each of the major denominations. This is the Catholic Church. The entrance would be, again, from the east. The Greek Church and the Armenian Church. And look at it. We go again from the east, just as in the Byzantine period, to the Basilica, which is facing, again, the west, the tomb. Go outside to the Holy Garden with Golgotha, and you enter the rotunda with a cone-shaped dome, with the edicule, with a cone-shaped edicule. It is surrounded by 4, really, you have to say minarets, right? Bell towers, but they look really like minarets. And 4 chapels for the other, small chapels for the other denominations. Like, you might remember that I said that there were 6 communities, and 3 plus 4 is 7. That's because in addition to the Ethiopians, the Copts, and the Syrians, there was an additional chapel for the Anglicans. Okay, it was made. It was made during the British Mandate, so okay, let's give Anglicans something. Okay, that's the Holy Garden. This is the rotunda, and look at this. This is the Church of St. Saviour. If you know, the Lutheran Church, from which was built in 1989, right here. Okay, so it gives you some idea of the shape. The length of the complex is 180 meters from the facade of the church to the rotunda, and 140 meters from Greek church to the Armenian church, and that's only the churches. Okay, that's without this huge piazza around it and monasteries and guest houses all around. If you look at it, it looks very local, okay, very indigenous, because we're going back to the Byzantine Basilica, really, right here. the same entrance from the east, and then the basilica, which is facing the west, and then the Holy Garden and Golgotha and Rotunda. But if we would analyze this plan a little bit more, and that not only Byzantine, but of course, very indigenous local Muslim shapes as well. Not only this Muslim orientation was severely criticized in Europe, but even if we look at the plan as it is, I will try to prove you that this plan is really Western, European, and very much, I would say, imperial colonizational kind of plan. Okay, so let's try and look at it more deeply. Despite the fact that the major part of its design were Oriental, as I said, the proposed plan bluntly expressed Western supremacy by calling for a huge Christian complex, which will lead to a destruction. Okay, let's look for a second. This is how, I'm sorry for the quality, but this is how this area looked like in the 30s and the 40s. This is the Christian quarter. This is the Cardo. Okay, so the Byzantine church started from here, but the actual church today is here. It's densely built. Okay, here you have a big market, which was built in the 19th century by the Greek Orthodox, the Muristan. Okay, here I'll show you in a second. You have two mosques, okay, which are surrounding Holy Sepulcher. On the south, El Umayyah, and on the north, El Salahiyah. And of course, here you have the Muslim quarter, and around the Holy Sepulcher you have a lot of shops which are selling artifacts for Christians, but mainly ran by Muslims. Now, in order to make, and here you can see, this is the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, El Umayyah, El Salahiyah. In order to build what Testa wanted, you needed to erase, okay, the Greek Orthodox market, the Muslim shops, both mosques, and this is the Cardo, okay, to invade the Muslim quarter. Okay, now, Archbishop Testa was not over troubled with this fact. Okay? This is what he said in the preface. The demolition of the small mosques surrounding the church would not be problematic, since the perception of the Waqf is going lately through secularization, and the loss of the mosque will be easily compensated by other property. Islam owes a debt of gratitude to the Christians for the great and generous activity in the East, introducing civilization, schools, hospitals, and orphanages. The generous outreach of the Muslim to the Christians will be interpreted as a sign of agreement between the nations. Of course.
You said Lieberman?
Not only that, but its patronizing approach is not limited to Muslim believers and merchants, but also extended to the Orthodox denomination who share, right, and own the rights for the Holy Sepulcher. It's an implementation of unilateral, independent plan without consulting the heads of other denominations, which is, of course, highly problematic. And although this plan is supposed to benefit everybody else, this is very, this fact only strengthened its initial colonialist approach. After all, we all know the colonialists carried the burden of the white man, bringing Western civilization, progress, and values to the conquered Eastern people. But not only that, if you take a look at what is written, how other denominations are described in this book, I would say you can hardly say they are described in flattering terms. Okay, I'll give you an example from the historical part of the book. Dark days approached. The Greek deepened their penetration into the church. Through firman they generously paid for. Following Russian pressure, the rights changed. The Greek acted with injustice to get exclusive rights to the Holy Sepulcher. In 1808, a fire broke out in the church, destroying a large part of it. The fire was too convenient to be accidental. The Greeks received permission from the government to repair the damages at their expense. They received permission which contradicted all the previous firmans, and they repaired the church very hastily, a fact which further damaged the building. The question is really, is this the plan which will foster some kind of a cooperation? Like, you know, not only this, even if you look at this seemingly oriental, indigenous, local plan, okay, the book was published in 1949. That's not just a coincidence. The plan was prepared way before. It was published in 1949 because this is the year when they were celebrating 800 years to the reconstruction of the church by the Catholic Crusaders. Okay? The arrangements of the new churches gave clear dominance to the Roman Catholic Church. The entrance is through to the whole complex. It's through Roman Catholic Church. These were intended to use the rock of the color of the famous, and I quote, famous Roman travertine. Okay, Roman travertine is something which we're talking about post-fascist period, right? If you go to fascist Rome, you go to Eur, or you go to Roman Forum, travertine is everywhere. You see travertine, you see fascism, you see travertine, you see Rome. Okay, you see Catholics, you see Europe. You don't see anything which was made here. There was a suggestion to open here an oculus in the ceiling, in the aedicule, similar to the Roman Pantheon. Okay, and of course, the dome is not round anymore. It's cone-shaped like the Crusader dome. And Crusaders were Catholics. So, needless to say, this plan was not implemented. I mean, you can't move a ladder, would you destroy the church? But Vatican renounced it in the 50s. And a decade after the plan was published, the three major denominations reached an agreement, and they commenced the restoration of the church. And I have to say, I hate when people do it, but it's really hard not to draw parallels between what people wanted to achieve here and between what happens today. Okay, because when Avi Dichter is talking about formatting Gaza, okay, or restarting Gaza, and people are saying let IDF win, okay, or on the other scale, let's close the electricity and water and separate ourselves.
Are you sure you want to talk politics?
Yes, why not?
Well, then you shouldn't have invited me. I'm sorry, I'm not a statist.
No, what I'm trying...
Sorry.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Listen to me at the end. Yes, listen to the end, please. Don't be with it. What I'm trying to say is that it's very, very tempting. At the course? Okay, I wanted to say that it's very tempting to say, let's, you know, end the conflict. In this case, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying it's bad or good, but I'm trying to say that it's tempting. It's tempting to say, let's do one stroke of a pen, unilateral decision, destroy all those problematic things, and start anew. Okay? It's very tempting to do this. But I'm not sure that it's always possible, and I'm not sure that when it's possible, if it's good. Okay? And if it's a desired solution. And in case of the Holy Sepulcher, it's a painstaking, very slow process, and it's one step forward, two steps backward, and it's almost every year there are fist fights, okay, and over the holy places between the communities themselves. But 3 years ago, they reached an agreement between themselves, and they built and opened new toilets. Okay, I know it sounds funny, but it's a progress. Okay, and I don't know if we can always make a unilateral decision. Just start anew. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we will start the discussion. We have 25 minutes left, so we'll okay. Maybe I will take 2 or 3 questions, and first people will answer, and then we will go on with the second round if we have time. Please.
Yes, I really enjoyed the panel very much and would like to thank everybody. My question specifically is, well, actually 2 questions related for Hila. Yitzhak and I did research on religious intolerance in 3 cities in Israel and presented at the Association for Land of Israel Studies. Unfortunately, we didn't do Baka, but what came to mind, we looked at religious intolerance in Nazareth, Tzvat, and Beit Shemesh. And one of the things, the striking things about Beit Shemesh is the conflict between Haredim and more moderate religious Jews, especially Anglo women who took it upon themselves to reclaim the public space. So I was kind of struck by the fact that here, even in Jerusalem, there's great talk about Hadarat Nashim, the effacement of women. I was wondering if that really came up in any particular way. And the other was, we also found the question linked to economics and an underlying fear related to drop in real estate prices when you had a more extremist group coming into the community, be it, say, the conflict in Natzeret, and also the Haredim moving into Beit Shemesh. So I would welcome to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Chaim?
I have a short question to Masha and some maybe comment or question to Yitzhak. To Masha, I wanted to know, do you know if these architects have different projects with the same approach? Like, you know, clearing the space and rebuild, or building or rebuilding? If so, where and what was the context? Because I think it's something that could be very interesting to know. And about Yitzhak's presentation, which I enjoyed very much, because I think you raised a very crucial question about the right to be represented. And I think in your presentation you were talking about, you know, the right to be represented in two levels. One is, you know, again, in a very symbolic way. But then, you know, when it comes to the actual designing or production of space, I think it's a different question, because it has a very material face, or it has a very material meaning, which, you know, questions this idea, which sounds very good on the paper, the right to be represented. So I think, you know, there is a gap between these two dimensions, which need to be more discussed. The other issue is a kind of methodological, because I think, you know, I'm dealing with this dilemma, so I want to share it with you. Whether or not doing comparative study between Israel and Europe has a relevance. I can understand the Australian or the American case, because I think the colonial histories and geographies, whether we like it or not, are very important to understand what kind of fear or what kind of geographies of fear are produced. So, you know, I'm working on in Paris now on the 19th, on this more about relations between Jews and Muslims. So it's a different sort of set of ideas about who is the other than we have here in Israel. And I think, you know, the very specific history of Israel and the geography of Israel are much more similar to other settler contexts than the European context, which is based on issues of migration and so on, which has some colonial histories, but it's very different. And so I would like to, you know, to hear what you have to say about it. And I think, you know, the whole idea of discussing space in relation to fear is, you know, there's a flourishing literature about, you know, politics or geographies of fear, Chilo, pain, etc., which I think could be very helpful, because it's really about, not just about what kind of fear is produced vis-a-vis the built environment or space, but also how space is shaped through this process of the construction of fear. So I think it's something that could contribute significantly to your project, which I find, you know, very interesting, of course.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
Also a comment to Yitzhak. In your initial taxonomy of minorities, immigration and indigenous, it seems conspicuous that you left out an immigration majority, which really is what describes our Israeli circumstance. I'm not delegitimizing it, but it is the reality. And it seems, in line with the last comment, that you didn't give really perhaps sufficient attention to the fear component, when it's not fear of being outnumbered by an immigration minority, but fear of a fifth column of the enemy. Because that's what's operative here in the Israeli context. And perhaps a worthwhile comparison would be the Islamic Center of Lower Manhattan after 9/11. There's a sense, I think, amongst some Americans, perhaps many Americans, that Islam is perceived as the enemy. And maybe that's a little closer to the Israeli context.
Okay, maybe you afterwards we will just first you answer those first wave of questions.
Okay, to Chaim, I would say that yes, the comparison here is not symmetric. I mean, Europe and Israel are different settings, and I presented them. Indigenous versus migration communities, and the other factor, which is different set of conflict, so different setting of conflict in Europe versus Israel. But even in Europe, you can find some, I would say, enclaves or other places like Bosnia, Kosovo, that you can find, some of them also have, indigenous communities there that you have similar situation. But my perspective was something more general. I tried to look at it from the prism of human rights and toleration. The question is, in every setting, I would say in every urban setting, how do you tolerate the other, the different community within your space, within your general space? In this regard, I think that every comparison is legitimate. I mean, what interests me is, why do people fear the other? Why do people, first of all, intolerate the other? And when I find that the reason for intolerating is of non-toleration is fears, I see the same fears. I'll give you some examples. In both locations, both in Europe and Israel, the people in the neighborhood, when you ask, and we asked as an example around the mosque in Beersheba, they say, we are afraid that the real estate, our houses and shops, the prices will drop down. Both of them are afraid. In Beersheba, as an example, there is the fear that Beersheba will transform from a Jewish state into a Jewish predominant state into a mixed city. Okay, and the fear of security. People say, both in Europe and Israel, when you ask them, and we interviewed some residents around the mosque as an example, they say, I don't want my daughter to go out of the house when Muslims are coming and praying in the mosque. I'm afraid that something will happen to her. And you hear it also in the same setting in Europe. So I think that if you look at if we live in a modern or postmodern society of multiculturalism, for those of us who still believe in multiculturalism, we have to think about tolerating, how to tolerate, what are the parameters of tolerating, how to balance between the interests of different groups, different communities, majority and minorities in this sphere. And I agree that, because of the lack of time, I could not really consider the literature, psychological literature about the issue of fears and regarding the construction of fear and so on. But I thank you for this note. I will next time I will make sure that I have 40 minutes and not only 20.
Okay, can I answer?
Did you ask me something, Ophir, just regarding the yes, the Jews are the migrants to the city according to the Muslim, and this is the core of the debate. I mean, this is the core of the debate of narratives in Israel, and the debate between what we heard before, that Muslims are at Kobe's paper, they speak about restituting the pre-1948 landscape of the land, which was Arab and Muslim and so on.
Okay, Chaim, I wanted to say that the person who, one of the persons, the other more didn't do a similar project, but Berluzzi, he has another non-implemented plan for the Church of Annunciation in Nazareth, which is also looked like a Byzantine church with 4 minarets around it, and those both plans were not implemented. And it's not only because there were problems, but also because they look like a mosque and Christian holy place. It's impossible to even think about this place to be built as a mosque. Although in other places like Algeria or Tunis, you see churches, even cathedrals, which are built with the same minarets around them, and there it's fine. Okay, it's the only place where he was supposed to destroy completely the church, and he didn't want to do it. The only reason he did this plan is because he believed it's not going to be implemented. There was a lot of pressure.
This is a good architect.
I know. And I do want to answer Moz for a second. Later, between ourselves. No, I have to say, listen, Moz, first of all, we're in Truman Institute. We're in Truman Institute. This institute is dealing with politics. Now you can say that Truman Institute... It's my...
Truman Institute for the Advancement of Peace.
But it doesn't matter. You don't have to... But it is a place where I think politics is allowed to be discussed. And what I want to say also is that I don't say it's good or bad, but I want you to see that there are resemblances, really, in psychology and in the needs of people to separate when there are conflicts, to separate, even if there's Christians, they're all Christians, still they want to be separated. They have different rituals, they have different ways of praying. Catholics use organ, Orthodox are allergic to organ. Okay, they can't hear it, and it's in the same church, in the same space. So people have a need to separate. And it's true for them, and it's true for us and Palestinians, and we can't. Nor them, nor us, because we still have the same... I mean, if this plan would be implemented, do you think something would be changed? It wouldn't be changed, because it's still the place of the Golgotha and the place of the tomb will still be mutual. They still have to do the ritual in the same places, so they can't separate, although they want to, okay? And people want to start anew. They want to avoid all these problems, just erase something and start over. This is what they did there. This is what some people are talking about today. And I think, yes, we need to understand that there are certain patterns, there are certain trends in people's minds which worked back then and still working today. And I don't think it's a bad thing to discuss it. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think we should avoid it because it's political.
Hila, you wanted to...
Yes. To your question, I think Baka is not a good case study for what you did, because that was my point, that the struggle was framed as a fear of Haredization struggle, which is definitely the case for other neighborhoods in Jerusalem, like Natour, Ramah, and many other places that do experience these things of women's and the economic side of it, of real estate dropping and that.
Yes.
But in Baka, the fear is so great that this will also be the case for Baka, but I don't think
there was no discussion of the gender issue that came up. That's one of the... No. Because as a psychoanalyst, I would say, and I was wondering if the summer camp wasn't sort of a
it was divided with boys and girls,
masking the gender issue because it's linked to nurturing children. And I'm not sure, I mean, because I don't know the situation well enough, but I'm wondering to what degree. And the other thing that I would say is that the issue of the gender issue has only come up once or twice during the used papers in very subtle ways, not so subtle. I think, Kobe, you mentioned the Muslim women paying, making contributions. That's very, very interesting. And I think Doron, it also came up, and it comes up a bit more in Christianity, but it is public space, and you have 50% of the population is female. So it's interesting. I mean, why isn't it appearing more? Why is it, and how is it, when it does surface, how does it surface? What is its meaning?
Yeah, I think that the gender thing has become very dominant in Jerusalem recently.
Right.
And there's a huge talk and discussion about it. But it wasn't the case for this, and maybe also because these two struggles were mainly dominated by men, and maybe I didn't really look into the gender issue. But I remember that the summer camp was had divided girls from boys, and they called the boys soldiers of the Messiah. That was the name of the camp, soldiers of the Messiah camp. And then there were only boys soldiers, but not girls soldiers. So maybe if I tried
I encourage you to pursue it more, because it's a great paper.
Okay, Michael?
I want just to refer to Yitzhak Reiter representation in public space, contested public space. I would suggest a distinction between identity of public space and control of public space. There is interrelations, but identity of public space, visibility, which is gradual, and mostly it's more related to culture. Control of public space is who has the right to control it. It mustn't be even physical. It can be by law. Who is the sovereign? Who is the right to control? And I mean there are subtle differences interrelated between the two. It's worthwhile trying to get into this difference.
Okay. Yes?
Just a short comment that Hila may want to say something about it later. Yitzhak rightfully mentioned the idea of real estate value. I found in several projects that people can say other reasons for communicate, for arguing for the public space, but basically the need is to take care of your real estate. I don't mean that everything should be reduced to real estate value, but it may be an important reason, and perhaps Hila, you should emphasize this aspect better. Actually, I could say a few more things because I live there and I know this guy, but and just to mention, and I would tell you that the prehistory of your PhD because I lived close by. But it's not.
Me too, by the way, me too.
It's not for the moment.
You interviewed
Different generations.
But I think 5 or 6 years later he did it step by step. He did not invade in one day the zoo. He was very slow, and suddenly a marvelous jeep arrived, and he was very humble. And so I asked him, where does this jeep come from? It's 2,100 shekels. So I'll tell you a little bit later. And one last question to Masha. You said that the travertine that it symbolizes, perhaps I misunderstood you, something fascist. But the travertine may not necessarily symbolize a fascist attitude. It is the material with which the beautiful monuments in Rome are built.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I said also the Roman Forum. Mm-hmm. Of course. It's Rome. It's Rome. It's Catholic. It's not. It's Europe.
Right.
It's not local. Nobody builds travertine.
Please.
Well, you know, I found all three of these papers very, very exciting, as indeed the preceding.
Louder.
But I wanted to comment on, because I can't address all the questions to all of you, but I want to comment on the comparative dimension of it.
Richard, use the mic, please.
Yes.
Please come in. Come.
Yes.
I wanted to comment on the comparative dimension of Yitzhak's work and relate it to what I thought was very, very interesting in Chaim's observation about the geography of fear. And think about America, and Ofer mentioned the mosque, and here it's very interesting. What preposition are you going to use? Is the mosque near, at, on, by, alongside of? I mean, depending on, you know, who was speaking about the mosque at the Islamic Center near Ground Zero, the preposition was very, very important, very important. But the geography of fear is absolutely essential to spatial conflict in the United States. And Islam is a very good example. And it matches, I think, the comment about property values. One of the big mosques in Los Angeles is called the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City. It's a beautiful, beautiful mosque, but it's in the middle of a residential area. And they have to have the mosque, I mean the minarets, right? So what does the community do? They say, we'll have the minarets, but there won't be anything, you know, loudspeakers. We're going to hear the call of prayer, nothing. So then they said, well, you know, having this place here is going to detract from property values. It's going to have all these cars here, you know, and the streets are beautiful mulberry-lined streets. And so then they said, the community said, we will build a four-story underground parking lot to hold something like 300 cars. And still the community resisted. And I think that the issue of the call to prayer, the minarets, the architectural style, plus the issue of neighborhood tranquility really masks something else. And that's the deep fear of the other, which is there in the American experience. And in some ways, in a frontier environment like Los Angeles, I would still say everything west of Washington, D.C., New York, Boston is the frontier. In the frontier environment, that fear, the geography of fear, is an old central fear, as people like Richard Slotkin have demonstrated, that the fear of the frontier and the other on the frontier. So that this issue of the geography of fear, I completely agree with you, is absolutely central to spatial conflicts, despite all the rationalization of them. That was more like a comment.
Do you want to add something for the speakers? Or?
Only one comment to Mike's comment regarding the difference between identity and control. Still, if you identify identity with visibility in the skyline of a city, as an example, is a symbol of control. I mean, who controls, who dominates the skyline? This is a symbol of those I mean, whoever erects a minaret which is 50 meters high or 35 meters high is seeking to control and to dominate the mosque. And you know, you worked on this issue, like in Israel we have the lighting the mosque minarets in green fluorescent light. This is, it is in purpose to show that this land belongs to us, or at least in the past it was ours, and we hope that in the future it will return to our hands.
Yes, it's still some subtleties.
Okay, we will stop here and for the coffee break, and we will reconvene in 10 minutes.
Thank you. Great job.